Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as always, David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's Friday. We're here talking to a legal expert about the Jeopardy Donald Trump is in. We have Charles Starr at YouGarls. You know him from the Hostile Witness podcast. Also, All Lawyers Are Bad. It's All Lawyers Are Bad series,
Bastards.
right? Bastards. Okay. I always thought of the bad, but Bastards, I think, is the correct one. And of the Mike Dick podcast, which I think is the greatest podcast name probably in the history of podcasts.
As soon as someone said it, I think the first person who said it was was Mike, who's at Ancient Care Lord, who was on a couple of episodes, and he said it, but he spelled it Mike, and I was like, no, give it a C, and then it's fucking gold.
Yeah,
which is like our tagline was America's best named legal podcast. Like, because it was like one of those things where, like, I heard it and I'm like, that's amazing. I'll never do anything that pure in my life
again. Today we are going to talk about the Trump raid, and we're doing this in the wake of Dark Brandon's ascendance to the high throne of communist fascism last night with his he appeared
in red, and that just means that the killings are about to begin.
There are people that are actually saying
I know. I want to make them sleep poorly.
But I want to talk about a historic event that happened recently and contextualize it for both myself and our audience. The Trump raid, the Mar-a-Lago raid, the MAL raid, as I forget, Michael Knowles calls it.
Yeah. Well, you only have 280 characters. I've
there you
MAL myself.
What was the Trump raid?
Okay, so it's funny because it's impossible to answer the question without like a ton of. This is great. The camera cutoff is amazing. You don't see my Italian hands. Not that I'm Italian, but I got them going on in space under the camera. But So, when your term ends as president, the archives take everything, right? Everything is a government record. And while you get it, you get it back if it's not, anything that they need to hold on to, they have to catalog everything. I assume in 2022, they digitize everything and they have like their comprehensive record. But, Trump talks all the time about how Obama has 33 million records because he's, doing the Obama presidential library, but the archives have already categorized all of it, right? He has it, but everyone knows he has it and they know exactly what he has. So the archives, as a matter of federal law, in the wake of Nixon, passed statutes that affirmatively, the Presidential Records Act affirmatively states that everything created by or reviewed by the president or the presidential administration is a government record, not a personal record, because Nixon tried to claim that it was literally his. And so he could take the tapes and he could take the documents and he could, fuck off back to Chula Vista and no one could touch him. And so the Congress passed a law in the wake of Nixon, which said that's not true. They're all government records. You can't keep them. They're not private. And so when Trump's presidency ended, he packed up everything. This is like a little loose, but roughly true. He packed up everything. The trucks went down to Florida, and he had all the stuff with him in Florida. And the archives were like, okay, we're missing a lot of stuff. You just packed up the office. Give us back the documents. And so they fight for a year over whether executive privilege covers it and whether they have to. And then in January of 2022, they send back, and you see this talked about all the time, 15 boxes of documents. They said, here you go. Here are the presidential records. And they sent back 15 boxes of documents. And in those boxes of documents, sorry, I have my notes here on the side for the details. They go through all of them, right? The archivists go through everything. And they spot 184 documents with classification markings, ranging from classified all the way to like top secret, sensitive, compartmentalized, and stuff relating to weapons and nuclear and the whole whatever. There are all of these different markings. I don't, it's like, an eye chart to me, because I don't know literally what they mean, because they're all abbreviated. But other people have been tweeting about them, and this is like roughly what it is. But it's classified, it's top secret, it's specific categories of top secret. Right. And so they contact the FBI and they're like, there are almost 200 documents at a country club in Florida that the former president, is not supposed to have. And so the FBI opens a criminal investigation, and the DOJ contacts Trump's representatives, and they say, what's going on here? You had 200 classified documents. Do you have anything else? We're pretty sure you do, because there are things that we expected to be either left behind or in this disclosure that we know you haven't given back, right? Like, I don't remember if it was at the beginning or later, but the correspondence with Kim Jong-un wasn't in there. Right, the perfect letter or whatever. They didn't have it, and that's like an important, federal record, national security document, confidential, whole whatever. Like, we've never seen that letter, right? There's a reason why that was never released, and it's because it's like, confidential diplomatic communications. And so they're like, you have to give us back the other stuff. The DOJ is like, give us more stuff. And eventually after going back and forth, they issue a subpoena. Or they say, sorry, it's so funny. The sequence is the National Archives are like, we want to let the FBI look at this stuff, the Department of Justice. We want them to review these documents. And they fight for 4 months over executive privilege and other disputes. But eventually the archives are like, we think all of your objections are invalid, and we're turning them over to the Justice Department because we don't think you have made a valid legal claim. And they do. And then the DOJ gets a subpoena because they think there's more, right? So now Trump has to respond to the subpoena, and he responds to the subpoena by inviting representatives of the government to come to Mar-a-Lago for an in-person exchange of the additional classified marked materials that his team has uncovered after an allegedly thorough search, right? They said everything classified is going to be in the storage room. We went by hand through everything in the storage room, and they hand them one like Redwell of documents. I don't know if you know what a Redwell is. They're those red manila, flap over the top documents, which they taped up like double. So, like no one improper can look at it to like do a sort of pantomime of protocol. And so they give them this thing, and that had 38 documents in it. Right. And they're like, that's everything. And one of Trump's attorneys wrote an affidavit. And we know, I guess, from other context, even though it's redacted in the filings here, apparently this was Christina Bobb, who's one of Trump's like PR people / attorneys. She is. She's like the public face is all I mean.
Okay, right.
She goes on the news. Like, I didn't mean that as snidely as it came out, but she's like someone who goes in front of the cameras and is his like official spokesman, but she's also counsel. And so she signs the affidavit, which says we went through this by hand, and this is everything. There's nothing else. And of course, they know that's not true, because still there are things missing. And so at that point, they write up an affidavit, and that was released in redacted form last week. And they go to the magistrate judge in Florida, in the Southern District of Florida, and they're like, we need a warrant. Like, we actually have to search his place, because we have already seen evidence of over 200 classified plus documents in his house. We have interviewed his staff. We have interviewed his house staff. We have reviewed the security tapes from Mar-a-Lago, and all of the witness testimony is that people go in and out of the room. And the security tapes show people going in and out of the room and moving boxes around. So we have reason to believe that they've been dishonest with us and that there will be more stuff if we go and look. And so they get the warrant and then they raid the place, right? They wait till he's not there so they don't have to taser the former president of the United States. And they go in and they search the place, right? The warrant gives them access to all of Mar-a-Lago except for currently occupied guest rooms, right? You know, some banker from Wisconsin who pays $200,000 a year to play golf at Mar-a-Lago and is staying for the weekend. They didn't search his room, but anything else, offices, empty rooms, Trump's personal office, the residence, they searched all of that, including the storage room. And they found over 100 more classified documents stored with non-classified documents. Like I tweeted this out today, but I had made it like, I mean, I didn't make the joke completely out of my head. It was in the affidavit too, but they said that in the initial 15 boxes, there were classified documents stored with like newspapers and magazines and blah, blah, blah. So I made some joke about him like stuffing the nuclear codes in an old copy of Us Weekly. Yeah. And if you read the inventory, because they released the search inventory today, there are boxes which are like, you know, 300 magazines and 45 confidential documents.
I don't know, like, I think it's like worth re-upping just for folks. Like, as much as I would like to think that Trump is just feeling very sentimental and he wants to, like, you know, hold on to these, remember fond memories. I mean, you know, what likely was being held there was some pretty serious stuff that you don't just want to be stored next to a U.S. Weekly magazine.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny as a leftist to like have this conversation because you end up seeming like you're like kissing the ass of like the Justice Department and the FBI. And like, but it's weird that when you... they may be irredeemable institutions, but in their idealized version, they like have a role in national security and the protection of, you know, certain important data and, you know, like people who like respond to like decarceration as if it means you like crime and all of these sort of dumb things. But it's like there is a need for justice. There is like, and so the fact of the raid makes a lot of sense in the context of, you know, even putting aside if the government overclassifies stuff and putting aside if the government is like shady in a million ways, some of them aren't shady. And we don't want like nuclear proliferation. Not that we know that it's, you know what I mean? Like in the extreme scenario of it, there is a reason why diplomatic channels are done in private for, you know, international comedy and all of that, right? So you can have like a basic respect for the interplay of government and politics to not want this lunatic stuffing shit in his bag because he thinks it's cool. And that's not even getting into the kind of more kind of woolly theories about if he's like overtly malign and turning it over to, you know, Saudi Arabia or Russia or any of like all of that shit is like not my interest. Like I don't disclaim that it's impossible. Like I think it's possible. I just consider it really hairy, wild speculation to think that that's what's going on. And I think it's a waste of my time to get myself all hot and bothered over that. Even if it's true, prove it to me before I like spend a lot of time ranting about it. Right. And this is coming from someone who thought the Mueller report showed fairly convincingly that Russia was at least trying to influence him, and some of his comrades, some of his, collaborators, Bannon and Eric Prince and Manafort, were like knee deep in the muck with Russia, whether or not he personally was, and whether you could tie it to him. So it's like, I don't think Russiagate was a hoax. I think the most extreme version of it is probably a little cinematic, but there was there, and there was at least reason to investigate a lot of it, because there was smoke even in places where there might not have been fire, right? But I don't have to go that far. I do know that he was like holding stuff that he shouldn't have had, and he thinks it's cool to show that shit to people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the principle. Like, I mean, putting this in the context of Nixon explains a lot, because Nixon had to fork over the tapes that he was recording of everybody, and it's not an unreasonable like procedure that those went through. They're scrubbed. I used to listen to them as a hobby. They're scrubbed of anything remotely personal, like probably generously so.
Yeah.
But that's a process to get this stuff into the sort of public sphere, because it belongs to all of us, and that's the principle that's being throttled here. And it's funny, I've seen certain people.
Though it's interesting, because it get like some of the back and forth gets a little confusing, because it is true that all of the documents are government documents, and so Trump doesn't have a right to them, right? But they didn't get the warrant on those grounds. Right? Because the Presidential Records Act itself does not have an enforcement mechanism. You're kind of just subject to the fact that you have to argue with the guy until he relents. No other presidents had a problem with this, but he did, right? He just took the stuff and he Molen-labed a bunch of white papers, right? And so he took this stuff, and they wouldn't have necessarily been able to get it by warrant, except that he also took classified stuff. And so that's how they got the warrant. They got him under 3 statutes, right? 18 U.S.C. 1519 is obstruction for taking records. 18 U.S.C. 2071 is taking the documents themselves, right? Like taking government records, and there's some narrowing of it, but that's basically what it is. And then 18 USC 793 is an even more specific version of 2071, which applies to like national defense documents, right? So that's how they anchored the warrant to search his property. As they said, he violated these criminal statutes based on what he already gave back to us. We have reason to believe he violated them. And based on the other evidence we've gathered, we have reason to believe he is still in possession of documents that violate these statutes. And so we're going to go in and we're going to take everything that has that document. And under the terms of the warrant, they also get to take everything stored with those documents, right? The reason why they take the pile of Us Weeklies is because it was in a box with a top secret document. And the reason you take the whole box, in part because it's just easier to cart away a box, but as a legal theory, what the government said in their response to his motion was, you prove how sloppy he is by showing how he stored this stuff. It was in an unsecure room in a box with a bunch of random garbage. Like, this is not how someone taking the confidentiality of classified material seriously treats things. And so they packed up the whole drawer. That's how they got his passports. They packed up the whole drawer where there was one document. They packed up these whole boxes. And so they explain why they're allowed to take all this stuff. And then when you see the inventory, they are now in possession of stuff that they wouldn't have found super easy to get back, of literally thousands of documents that belong to the National Archives because they were in boxes with the confidential stuff.
And like, not to be too sparkly eyed about all of this,
Right.
but on the level of like, equality under the law, obviously the president does like enjoy tremendous privileges. privately I was talking to some, military friends, government friends, and they said when they saw the photographs, like it literally gave them a panic attack just because like being around those documents before had always made them so nervous that if they fuck up, their life could be really ruined forever, and like this is how serious people in that world take it because they know that the hammer can come down on you. And, apart from the seriousness of like him maybe using it for something else, it's literally is just like if you have possession of these kind of things, there's a responsibility that is inherent there about how you're, protecting classified.
And you certainly know it's part of the job, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if you think it's unserious, right? Like, even if you don't believe in speeding laws, if you do 100, you're pretty aware you're going to get pulled over, right? You at least should have in the back of your mind that you might, even if you're like the most extreme libertarian, the idea that you actually will get pulled over for it should cross your mind. You should have a healthy fear of that because of the danger you are putting other people in, right? And so, I mean, and with respect to like seeing those documents, which by the way is very funny, that the thing that he's angry about is that it made him look like a slob, right? Trump. He's like, they showed the documents piled on the floor, and that's not what I do. Which is, of course, the FBI or the DOJ never even said that that's what it was, right? Yeah. They spread it out like the way I describe it is they spread it out like the way like a local police department stacks the guns and drugs on a table to show what they got out of the trap house, right? That's what that was. This is a photo of like all of the confidential stuff so that we can have a record of where we recovered it and when and how much was in this box. And it's just sort of part of their cataloging. And they anonymized everything except for the confidentiality markings. And then he made it seem like they were trying to make him look like a slob instead of a guy who had dozens of these things packed next to his framed Time magazine covers. Right.
Very unfair. Very unfair.
Very, very unfair to him. But then, all day today, people have been tweeting photos of his office, which are hilariously messy. Like there's shit stacked everywhere in his pre-White House office. So it's like, whatever.
If he was a super tidy guy, I would be a little bit upset with myself at how bad. I want to play this clip of Bill Barr from this interview, and then ask you about who is representing Trump.
I think it would, at this stage, since they've already gone through the documents, I think it's a waste of time.
Attorney General Barr, we've seen that famous photo of all of the top secret /SCI materials arrayed on the floor in President Trump's office there at Mar-a-Lago.
There it is.
He claims that he had a standing order to declassify anything that he took out of the White House when he left in January of 2021. Is there any legitimate reason for those materials to be in the former president's possession?
No, I can't think of a legitimate reason why they could be taken out of the government, away from the government, if they're classified. I frankly am skeptical of this claim that I declassified everything, because frankly, I think it's highly improbable. And second, if in fact he sort of stood over scores of boxes, not really knowing what was in them, and said, I hereby declassify everything in here, that would be such an abuse. And show such recklessness that it's almost worse than taking the documents.
To that point, though, there's some questions
it's
over the
such a kill shot.
And Trump has responded. He said on True Social an hour ago, Bill Barr had, quote, no guts and got, quote, no glory. He was a weak and pathetic rhino who was so afraid of being impeached that he became a captive to the radical left Democrats. Please don't impeach me, he supposedly said. Barr never fought the way he should have for election integrity and so much else. He started off okay as AG, but faded fast. I like he's talking about like a racehorse.
Yeah.
Didn't have courage or stamina.
They tested his urine after.
Exactly. He didn't have courage or stamina. People like that will never make America great again. So that's one. There's several tweets. Trump's
and so that's the first half of Barr, which is like it's just such a brutal thing to say. Where he's like, they keep arguing that it's declassified, but if that's true, that's worse than anything else he did. right? Like just right off the top, if he was declassifying, like as a matter of course, things that were otherwise supposed to be top secret, he's insane and a menace, right? And then he goes on to argue, I think he goes on to argue that, you know, the Justice Department has the better of everything in the argument.
They're getting jerked around, he said, I think.
Yeah. He did. Like, this is, you know, I gave you the timeline before of the back and forth. And he basically is like, once you give them an affidavit that says you've given them everything and they know it to be untrue, what do you mean a second subpoena? Like, they've already asserted, like under oath, that there's nothing else. A second subpoena is like the I strenuously object from a few good men. Like, it doesn't mean anymore, right? They're just going to respond to it, see prior affidavit. Or if you do turn some stuff over, then you have to sort of explain why you gave them the first affidavit, right? So they get the warrant, they go search. And I mean, one of the best lines in the DOJ's like brutal, and it really is. It's like it picks, you know, the Trump position to shreds all the way through. One of the things they said is our agents found in 2 hours in the storage room twice as many documents as they found in like 2 months of delays, you know, because they kept asking for extensions. And so they're like, we found, you know, twice as much. We found 74 documents in the storage room alone where you said you had gone by hand through this stuff. And this is what the documents looked like. It's not like a handwritten C in the corner or something. It's got these bright colored cover pages, which say top secret in 42-point font. You know, like you couldn't have missed this if you're being serious, you know? And so that's what they did. And, you know, the last Trump brief was better than the first one, but all of them are, you know, long on histrionics and short on law, right? They keep yelling about how abused he is and how the DOJ is unfair and this is unprecedented, but they cite cases which are irrelevant, right? They cite cases about Clinton's executive privilege when Clinton was literally still the president. You know, and so it's like, that doesn't count for you. You're actually not the president, you know? And they want the special master for attorney-client privilege. And then all of the cases they cite are like the Michael Cohen case or the Rudy Giuliani case, and there were special masters in both of those, and a few other cases. But in all of those cases, the police or the FBI or whoever was raiding a law office. And the thing about raiding a law office is they have other clients. And so you don't want the police rummaging through the attorney-client files, especially of people who aren't implicated in what you're looking at in the first place. So you get a special master there. They gave one of the examples where they were like 97% of the material in this law office raid wasn't relevant to the search. And so the filter team pulled all of that out. So that's when you get a special master. You don't get a special master just because you used to be the president and you're upset at something.
I want the specialist master that has ever been mastered. What do you make of Trump's representation?
Well, I mean, there are varying degrees, right? Here are the 4 people that I know about. There are 2 more whose names I can think of. Lindsay Halligan is like, you know, she's young and pretty, and she's the kind of person you want to be a spokesman, like Christina Bobb is. She doesn't seem to have a ton of background. She's got fewer than 10 years of practice. And nothing that I found seemed super impressive. On the Florida Barr site, her email address is outlook.com. So she doesn't have like a business address that it goes to. Evan Corcoran is an ex-prosecutor who is now in private practice, I think in the Maryland area. And so he's got, some credentials. But he also, it's very weird to have him on the briefs because he's also potentially a witness. Like he was involved in a lot of the correspondence with the DOJ, right? Like he made representations. He spoke to them during this. So it's not hugely surprising that he's involved, but it's a little weird, right? Because it may get to a point where he ends up having to be interviewed about this stuff. And then the third, up until a couple of days ago, was Jim Trusty, who was a DC attorney. He was in the DOJ for almost 30 years. He was pretty high up in the DOJ. So my guess is he's got real chops. I mean, this is hack work, but he doesn't have much to work with. There's really no precedent that gives Trump the right to do this. So he's like, starting with not a lot. And then the guy who was added recently and who I think did oral argument yesterday on this motion is Christopher Kise, who is the former Solicitor General of Florida, and he was a prosecutor. And so he has climbed high enough that he's probably not dumb, like he is probably the guy, like one of the guys you want to put your best foot forward. I mean, he's not as experienced probably as Trusty, but he was high up in the Florida government, probably not a dummy. Like some of the other people seem like, not as a Kayleigh McEnany back in the day. He was, had no experience and was a hack. And Christina Bobb doesn't seem to have much of a history. Neither do I. I mean, pot kettle, whatever. But, I've been around for a long time, but my resume is not impressive. And then there's one more whose name I don't remember. Hababa or something like that, right. Who represented Trump in the New York Attorney General investigation. And she went on Fox News and almost certainly incriminated herself because she said she went by hand, like she submitted an affidavit in New York saying she went through the entire storage room by hand, and she does not have security clearances. So if that's true, she was not allowed to see any of those documents. And it only proves how slack Trump was in securing them. Right? That a person that knowing that there were, or should have known that there were classified documents in there, and he let someone without security clearance do the work to respond to Tish James's subpoena, which is unimpressive.
What would you respond to somebody who said, Hillary should have also been raided? For
what?
Well,
in all seriousness, right?
Thing.
I mean, the answer is for what? I mean, and look, I am one of the people on the left who very early on thought that Hillary was fucking up the email stuff because it is bad, right? Her motives were bad. She wanted more control over documents that should have been in the government control, right? Though it seems much more obvious that it was for sort of personal PR damage control-y sort of reasons than, anything much more than that. She wasn't, she's an enemy of the left, I guess, but she's not an enemy of the state, And so what she did, goes back to Bill's entire suspicion of everything and was bad. She shouldn't have done it. There's literally no reason to have had a private server for any of this stuff. But there's also no reason that she got rid of any sensitive information. And so she dug her own grave on that stuff, but there's not really any evidence that she should have been raided, right? I don't know that there was anything that wasn't somewhere else. Right? The government systems, I think, were redundant. I don't know that the archives have complained that they think they're missing anything, Right. So it's what she did was wrong, but I don't think it's analogous.
And I think that's why, or partially why, I think that Trump is comparing himself to Obama in this instance and not Hillary, and also probably.
Oh no, he compares himself to Hillary because Hillary can't make up for it. Like they're gone, right? She wiped the drives or whatever. Though he keeps implying that they didn't turn stuff over, but they actually turned over most of the servers. Just some of the servers had been wiped, and I don't know. It's all fucking in the weeds, but it's like Hillary dug her own grave, but the Obama stuff is just nonsense. His records are in the Obama presidential library. The archives know exactly where they are.
He still goes on about Hillary. I haven't seen that so much because I would figure that would be against his case. He's also saying lock her up. So it's like, if we're going to take this super seriously, buddy, like you signed yourself up for it.
Oh yeah. He's not a big believer in the hubris theory of accusations.
Right. Well, I think that really covers it. Unless David, you have any questions? Is there any other parts of this you think are worth emphasizing?
Let me take a quick peek through my notes, but I don't really think so.
Is he going to wriggle out of this? I mean, there's the Jesse Farrar tweet of Trump is really
nevertheless.
Yeah. And then Trump easily wriggles out of it, and well, nevertheless.
Right. No, I don't think so. I mean, I will say I'm going to I'll probably go deeper in the weeds when I'm talking, because inshallah, I will be recording with my hostile witness buddies next Friday, and I'll try to turn that around, and we'll probably get more in the weeds of the documents themselves instead of the sort of broader, and I hope very easily accessible way of explaining all of this stuff. I sort of try to speak English as much as I can. But I don't think I have anything else. Well, the other thing that we're going to talk about when we record, our plan is to go into a time capsule and talk about the latest twists and turns in the Mueller report, where, the background memoranda that allowed Barr to claim that, he decided that Trump did not commit obstruction, which, they had been shielding from FOIA release for 3 years. The judge finally was like, no, those are going to be public, and those came out. So talking about that fight and the content of those memoranda is what, another thing that we're going to cover.
All right, we are back with a Left Reckoning update with Charles Starr. Charles, a special master has been named.
Well, not named yet, but there will be one named. Yeah, the judge in Florida, Judge Cannon, issued an order in response from the clown court. Trump's people made this really sort of haphazard claim to a special master. I think this is being tacked on to what I just said. So anyone watching this, I suppose, knows already. But right, so Trump makes a crazy claim. The Department of Justice shreds it. Trump files a marginally better response. There is an oral argument that was open to the public, but no one was allowed to live tweet it, and they didn't put it on the air. So everything I have about it is secondhand. But all of the contemporaneous accounts were, holy shit, she's really going to do this. And put a special master. Took a couple of days for her to issue her opinion, and that's exactly what she did. So she has now said that the national security review of the documents can go forward. She's not getting in the way of that, right? Anything that was already turned over to the Intelligence Review Committee or board or whatever they call their intra-agency national security people are still doing that. But with respect to the criminal investigation that the subpoena was issued under and the grand jury that this is potentially, to be provided to, all of that, she has issued an injunction stopping the entire government from proceeding with the document. So it's frozen until a special master comes in. I've seen other people say that that's beyond her jurisdiction. It gets a little more in the weeds that I am aware of about the injunctive authority of district courts. People are saying, like, just because of sovereign immunity, you can't enjoin the entire United States government. You may be able to enjoin agencies or individuals or whatever, but the breadth of this is crazy, but so is the reasoning, right? There's like, there are no, what she wrote to justify this special master is essentially a bespoke rule for a former president of the United States, right? Because nothing else makes sense, right? Like, you're supposed to have irreparable injury as one, and she goes out of her way to say that the federal government has not treated him unfairly, right? She's like, prong one, has it been prejudicial? No, right? But she's like, is the harm irreparable? And she ties it entirely to like his reputation as this defending, which is literally every defendant. Every defendant has reputational harm when they're being investigated for something like this. She says that, some of the, the government like admits that some of, personal materials and like some medical records and stuff have been swept up. And so that is irreparable harm. But he hasn't even argued that any of the personal material is critical and needs to be returned immediately. She is like on her own, unless it all came out in the hearing, but there is no medical record sitting in a desk at Donald Trump's office that isn't duplicated somewhere else, right? So there's no irreparable harm to the government keeping that copy. There's no financial record that he has the only version of. And so the definition of irreparable harm is being stretched way beyond any conceivable meaning. And it's just like that over and over and over again. She doesn't discuss at all the jerking around that Trump's people did. She doesn't discuss at all the actual relevant precedent with Nixon and, his claims to own everything. Where she does address it, she fudges. She's like, well, arguably a former president has, executive, can invoke executive privilege. But Nixon was doing it against Congress, not to the next president. He was literally the president at the time. He wasn't even an ex-president. He had the highest level of executive privilege that you could have. And the Supreme Court said no, right? You have to turn it over to a different body, right? And here, Trump is claiming it against the current executive. Like, everything is fudged. And every bit of Trump's behavior, she bends over as far backward as she can.
So
I just want to say real quick, David, sorry, some more frivolous points, but I have to point out, like, Eileen Cannon, it does sound like a Thomas Pynchon character. And also, she is a decade younger than that Nixon president born in 1981, for in case
let's not talk about it too much. She's also a decade younger than I am. And she's a federal judge in Florida. She is and she ticks all the boxes, right? She was Federalist Society at Michigan. She is people who are like, she was born in Colombia, but she was born in Colombia after her parents fled Cuba. So she has gone from, so I'm sure she is in like the sort of conservative Florida Cuban community, and true believer. She was confirmed after the election, right? When McConnell was shoving all of the nominees through between November and January. So like all of the indications that she's a hack. Apparently she wrote like anti-vaxxy kind of opinions early in the pandemic, giving people broad rights. And so she's playing the role that everyone expected, right? The people who thought the worst of it at the beginning, and I try not to. I don't know. I feel like there's some responsibility not to always be like, the very obvious red flag. Doesn't always mean everything, but it did here. Like, there's no getting around it. She issued exactly the opinion that she thought she would. I mean, I tweeted about this, but there's like a footnote on attorney-client privilege, right? And, I think I explained how the privilege team works, right? They whip through everything. They segregate out everything they think is privileged, and they don't give it to the trial team. And they have a separate proceeding before the judge to figure out what is and isn't privileged, right? There were 2 documents, and she mentions this, 2 documents slipped through the filter team to the trial team. And when the trial team was going through the material, they go, I think these 2 documents are privileged, and they give them back, right? You would think that would be an indication of good faith in the system working, but it instead gets whipsawed into proof that the taint team doesn't work as designed, because 2 documents slipped through, and we don't know how much those 2 documents were read. We don't know if the people who read them were kicked off the team. Like, all of these things that in a normal course wouldn't even be questions, right? An inadvertent disclosure like that, where someone recognizes it on like it may not even be privileged. It's just arguably privileged and has to go through the process. And, you can either put the best face on it and say that the DOJ is acting responsibly and filtering things back to the taint team if the taint team makes a mistake, or you can say this is just proof that none of this works and you need a special master, and she chose path 2.
So, I mean, obviously, very dubious decision, and just assuming that it's not challenged in some form or another. I mean, could you just explain to folks, what this really means for the timeline here?
Well, it's hard to figure out exactly what the timeline is. I mean, the first part of the timeline is that she gave both sides 4 days to submit special master names and a protocol for the special master's review, which will probably include a timeline. Both sides, at least in the initial, in their initial filings, wanted to make sure that they said it was a requirement that the special master has to have top secret clearance, because the special master is going to have to review this stuff. So if they don't have clearance, they can't do it. Both sides agreed, and I don't think the judge will disagree. That substantially limits the special master pool, I think. I don't know that federal judges automatically get that clearance the way the president does. It very often is the case that in top secret, like Defense Department cases, they file things under seal, and they don't even file them under seal. They submit affidavits that are like, even you can't see this. And so I don't know how courts handle that. I just know that it has happened. I remember a very specific case, which was like a tort case where a pilot was killed, and they wouldn't even let the judge see like the airplane design documents and stuff like that. So that's number 1, is 4 days. And then that will probably mean appointing a special master very quickly. I can't imagine that either side wouldn't vet the people for availability before putting their name on this list. Other than that, the 2 relevant timelines are either an appeal timeline, which is, I'm sure that if they go to the 11th Circuit, they would ask for it to be expedited. But the 11th Circuit can say yes or no to that, right? It's unlikely that they would say no. They've slow rolled. Courts all over have slow rolled other things that you would think they would want to move fast. But, they have the discretion. They could slow roll it. He has appointed 6 of the 11 non-senior judges on that court. Who knows what the panel would be. But like there are like multiple steps. It could go to a 3-judge panel who happen to all be Democrats, reversing whatever bias, and they snap, expedite it, and reverse. If he asks it to go to the en banc court, we then have 6 of 11 who are Trump appointees, not even Republican appointees, Trump appointees. He really stacked this court. And so, maybe what percentage of them are hacks and what percentage of them actually give a shit about actual executive privilege and, discovery operations. I don't know. And then, of course, there's the Supreme Court, which is always a fucking mixed bag of weirdness on partisan issues. Like they weren't terrible generally on the absolute dumbest election stuff, but they've been pretty vigorously dumb on other partisan stuff. So who knows? So that's one track of the timeline. The second track, if they actually just decide not to appeal because the appellate courts are a crapshoot, is just the review itself. And the Trump people are just going to throw as much sand in the gears as they can, right? It's 11,000 documents, which is nothing. Right. The special master, let's be clear. I do not think that there is a chance that a retired federal judge is going to hand by hand go through 11,000 documents. The special master, I'm sure, will have a staff who are also cleared to review the documents and whatever. 11,000 documents is nothing. Right. Yeah. They could really fly through that. I mean, the government did. Right. The government had all of this review done in just a couple of weeks after the seizure, because they threw a lot of bodies at it. And they, I am sure, would ask the same to happen here. But they are going to fight every document at every level and slow it down as much as possible. So the answer is no one knows how long this is going to take, right? They want it to be as laborious and slow as possible. And so that's what they're going to do. And if Cannon is going to let them do it, then Cannon is going to let them do it.
And so just to underline, this is quite a mockery of justice. Like that, the Trump folks are sort of calling foul on all these administrative procedural things in the context of them flaunting sort of National Archives stuff. It's ludicrous from any angle you look at it.
And it doesn't look like in any way the Justice Department did anything remotely wrong, right? They waited after a year of back and forth with a not particularly honest interlocutor, right? At each step, Trump kept screwing them and lying in different ways. Like another interesting thing I saw is just to even respond to the judge's order, right? The DOJ had to ask the judge supervising a grand jury in the District of Columbia for permission to make certain statements about the discovery, the negotiations, because they otherwise would have been confidential grand jury materials. And one of the things they said is, our subpoena said we want all documents that fit these criteria under Trump or the Trump organization's custody, or the transition, or whatever terms they used, under their custody and control. And when they wrote back to us, they said, we searched Mar-a-Lago and everything is in the storage room. And they're like, that's not the only relevant location, right? They could have searched Bedminster. They could have searched Trump Tower. The subpoena is not limited to his residence in Mar-a-Lago. Our search warrant was for there, because you have to do those location specific. Like if they wanted to go into Bedminster, they'd have to go to the District of New Jersey. If they wanted to go to Trump Tower, they'd have to go to the Southern District of New York and have subpoenas issued there to search those premises. The first one they got, probably because their information was he took everything home to Mar-a-Lago, or at least most of it. They got that subpoena where they thought most of it was. They got a magistrate to sign the subpoena. They took what they were entitled to under the subpoena, and they went through it as fast as possible to move through like, obviously their main interest is their own prosecution, but it also gets his private stuff back as soon as possible if he's entitled to it, right? They gave him the passports as like a nice gesture, even though they said they didn't have to, whatever, right? Like, it's impossible to read this and think that Trump is the aggrieved one, unless you actually buy the argument that it's your job as a federal judge to like hose down the MAGA morons who are like claiming that they're going to riot if their God King gets in any trouble, right? And this, like, to the extent that she thinks it's her role to turn down the heat on this stuff, and she definitely implies it, right? It was a big argument that Trump's people made, and how mad they made it by implication, but they're like, people are very upset by this. And, this is and she kind of buys into that a little. And it's not the judicial role. It's not a good way to judge the merits of a request for a special master. And it ends up treating this guy differently because his stands are so insane.
Yeah. Well, Charles, thank you so much for joining us again on this update. Hopefully it doesn't change too much in the couple hours between runtime. But give your plugs one more time for folks.
Sure. I think in between when we recorded and now, the latest episode of A Lab series did come out. It is, I'm not on it, but Andy and Tarek, Allah Liker and White Privilege, went back and interviewed a guy who they sideswiped in episode 8. He wasn't even the main character of that episode, but he was a colleague of the main character of that episode who they kicked around a little because he's a character, and he ended up suing them. And as part of the settlement for the suit, they brought him on to episode 27 to let him tell his story. And it's kind of a fascinating document. And so I recommend you listen to the end of 8 first, which he probably considers horrible, but it provides context. And then you can listen to episode 27 and you really sort of get an idea of who he is and what the litigation was. And I think it's kind of crazy. And so that's the big one. I've got an episode I'm recording on this with my hostile witness friends, Eric Michael and Patrick Cosmos on Twitter. Patrick Cosmos's Twitter is actually @veryimportant. But those two guys and I are going to record an episode about this and about the old Bill Barr stuff regarding the Mueller report. And hopefully I'll get that out early next week, I think.
Awesome. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, guys.